know Donald Trump better than most. Covered him for many years.
Yeah.
Many years
Yeah.
as a reporter, covering him as a politician and as a figure who takes things and will turn them the way that he wants America and the world to see them. Yeah. I will be shocked if Donald Trump doesn't, as soon as he can, get out there and argue not only that the Supreme Court is behind him.
So I just want to thank all of you for being here. I think it's a very big day for America. I think it's a very big day for liberty, and I think it's just a great day for this country. Again, I hope it's unifying like I think, but it is. It's a big step toward unification.
My larger reaction is disappointment. I do believe that states should be able, under our Constitution, to bar oath-breaking insurrectionists. And ultimately, this decision leaves open the door for Congress to act, to pass authorizing legislation. But we know that Congress is a nearly non-functioning body. So ultimately, it will be up to the American voters to save our democracy in November.
And I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the leading candidate, whether it was the leading candidate or a candidate that was well down on the totem pole. You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly.
Isn't it just amazing watching the left just beside themselves, man, with complete confusion? You know, Trump deranged, inspired confusion. But this is what happens, isn't it? When everything you believe is based on lies, or if you want to be charitable, everything that they believe is based upon faulty assumptions. For example, and not just including, but just one example, whether or not an insurrection actually happened, and whether or not, if it did happen, which it didn't, but if it did, was Donald Trump even responsible? When he said, go and be heard peacefully, or whatever it was he said, was that incitement, right? The left has convinced themselves over years and years of fantasy after fantasy after fantasy that an insurrection took place, and that any of us that disagree, or really not even disagree, but any of us that actually know what the word insurrection means, are denying that anything at all took place on January 6th, right? That's not the case. We can all agree that that was a terrible day. It should have never ever happened, but we can also agree that these things do happen when you have large groups of angry people who feel like they aren't being heard. And we only saw it hundreds and hundreds of times leading up to that day. We had already witnessed angry and ignored people cause $2 billion in damage, injure thousands of people, and kill dozens. So January 6th was no real surprise. The only surprise came in how it was used, right? And thankfully, if you really want to break it down, a different class of people really did show up that day. And I think the evidence of that is the fact that not one piece of artwork in the Capitol Rotunda was even touched by the so-called violent extremists, right? Anyway, I believe that any reasonable people can agree on this. And now, thanks to a unanimous Supreme Court decision, I think we can also agree that the 14th Amendment scam, which is all it was just another liberal fantasy in a long, long line of get Trump liberal fantasies. Each one crazier than the last, frighteningly. And just like any good fantasy, this one was tough to shake. It's going to be tough to shake.
But there's a second extremely important unanimous aspect of this opinion that's not being noticed, Becky. They did not explicitly deny the lower court findings that Donald Trump was an insurrectionist. Multiple fact finders have reached that conclusion. Indeed, if you look at the evidence, the January 6th committee, Colorado, Maine, Illinois have all found that, and that was not expressly overturned. And indeed, the three Democratic justices pointed to it in their concurrence. So in a sense, they have left the question open for the criminal authorities and for the American people what to do about Donald Trump's allegedly criminal conduct.
That guy was on immediately after the ruling, and I don't know where these shows get these purely insane wackos on such short notice, But listen to what this guy says, with no pushback at all from the propagandists in control of the show. He says the Supreme Court, in denying that any state could remove Trump under the Insurrection Act, did not explicitly say that he isn't an insurrectionist. And he says that's proof that the Supreme Court, liberal justices included, are allowing an alleged insurrectionist to remain on the ballot. And I don't know about you, man. It's crazy. It's amazing what confirmation bias will allow a person to believe. I mean, the best part is when he says, they've left it open to the American people to decide for themselves, as if that's some sort of new and brave concept, when it's exactly the point. I mean, it's amazing. The defenders of democracy are shocked by the idea of actual democracy. It's like it's some brand new concept to them. It's insane. But, they don't all pretend to care about democracy. MSNBC, of course, they don't care at all. They had their usual tone-deaf viewpoint. They said this doesn't prove there wasn't an insurrection. And all this radical activist court is doing is stopping the American citizen from watching a federal court decide for them exactly what happened and to what degree Donald Trump needs to be punished.
Notable that today is the day that the trial against Donald Trump for January 6th would have started, and instead we're talking about this Supreme Court opinion on the 14th Amendment, and we're not going to get to talk about that trial because the Supreme Court last week delayed it through at least April, the end of April. And so the Supreme Court will decide that case. I suspect very strongly that that case will be the inverse of this one, that it's a unanimous or close to unanimous loss for Donald Trump on the idea that he's absolutely immune. And assuming the Supreme Court can reach that decision quickly, and I sure hope they reach it as quickly as they reach this one, then the trial against Donald Trump for January 6th can proceed, and we can learn, the American public, with all the evidence splayed out in front of us, did Donald Trump commit insurrectionist acts on January 6th? That's the crucial question, and we, the American public, deserve to know the answer to that question and to hear all of the evidence.
It's amazing, man. You got to be careful with these people. These people deliver their crazy messages with such even and reasonable sounding voices, right? And they just expect you to not actually consider the words they use, but just believe them. And I think a lot of people that tune into these networks, I think they fall for that. This guy's position is that this bad decision by this bad activist court comes on the day, purposefully on the day that we were supposed to find out if Donald Trump committed insurrectionist acts. Now, I'm not sure if this guy's just not aware or if he's purposefully misleading the audience. I think it's probably the latter. I think this is what these people do. But just a reminder, Donald Trump isn't charged with any insurrectionist acts. He's charged with 2 counts of obstructing a proceeding, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud, and 1 count of conspiracy against rights. So for these people to come on, literally taking advantage of their viewers and leading them to believe that this is a trial or was a trial to answer the insurrection question once and for all, is just irresponsible. And it's also important to note, according to them, it's not even a question to begin with. They believe that it already happened, but luckily, and I say luckily because we are lucky, they aren't all insane. The only voice of reason on CNN, legal analyst Elie Honig, which we've shown before, he was also on.
What they're saying?
Essentially what they're saying is it's up to Congress to tell us how this works. So if Congress had, let's say 50 years ago, Congress had passed a law saying we're going to let the states do it, so long as they abide by due process, then what Colorado did would have been fine. But Congress has done essentially nothing in the 150 years since the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. Now, I want to make sure people understand this. It's a very important feature of this decision. There is no substantive discussion in here by the Supreme Court of whether Donald Trump did or did not engage in insurrection.
Interesting.
There is no conversation about what the meaning of his words at the rally were, or what happened inside the Capitol, or any of Donald Trump's actions. That's not what the Supreme Court has done here. That's not what the Supreme Court typically does. This is a procedural, legalistic decision. And essentially, if I had to boil it down to one sentence, it would be, it's up to Congress, not the individual states.
They didn't want a big messy situation where all the states go here and there and that sort of thing.
The word I circled in this decision is, quote, patchwork. They said, we don't want a patchwork where one state's doing one thing and another state's doing another.
The one thing I'll say here is, they didn't rule on what Donald Trump did or didn't do, or whether what he did or didn't do even was an insurrection, because no one can even agree on whether or not an insurrection even happened, including the government, which in 3 years has never charged anyone who was there, or people who weren't, like Donald Trump, or anyone caught up in the snare with insurrection. They have not charged anyone with insurrection or anything relating to insurrection. And I think Honig's point was that's still not decided. And if it's not decided, how could it possibly be used as a contributing factor to disqualify someone, which honestly is too reasonable, right? Liberals believe that if they think something happened, or if they say it happened enough, then it must have actually happened. But that's just not how it works. And now, 3 years after, it's still up to the voters to decide what it is that they think happened. But, some of these people really do think that this is how votes work anyway. You can vote on the ballot, or apparently they think you can vote in a court.
Remember how this all started was by voters. This was sort of a project that was started at its inception with a liberal think tank group that was trying to see if they could disqualify the former president. They started sort of a state-by-state effort trying to figure out which states would be most receptive to it. But it wasn't just progressives who were thinking that they might actually be able to do this successfully, Craig. There were a number of outspoken Republicans and other conservatives who had tried to make this argument and say, if you look at just the plain text of the 14th Amendment, he should be banned. But again, we're going to work our way through the decision and see exactly how the court dispensed with it.
Probably not the first time you've heard this argument, but guys, isn't it funny when it's something that fits their fantasy or fits one of their narratives, they can actually claim that, Republicans want this. This is Republicans doing this. We should listen because they're Republicans. But yet, when Republicans want something that doesn't fit their fantasy, doesn't fit their narrative or any of their wacky agendas, then what Republicans want is dangerous and it's wrong and it's Putin and Republicans are Putin, Russia, 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 whatever. But this apparently is what bipartisanship looks like in the year 2024. So that was her take, man. She says this was progressives and rhino Republican citizens just basically trying on whatever weak blue states they could find that may give some sort of credibility to their insane and unlawful ideas. But that's her take. So what was the dangerous and evil Donald Trump? What did he have to say about it? What was his take?
Rogue prosecutors, and I have rogue judges. I have judges that are out of control. And it's a very unfair thing for me, but serving perhaps as a sample to others of what should not be happening when you make good decisions. And in my case, the economy was great. We didn't go into any wars. We totally defeated ISIS. We provided the largest tax cuts in history. We provided the largest regulation cuts in history. But think of it, no wars. We beat ISIS 100% of the caliphate. And there were no wars. We did a job that was great, but maybe I wouldn't have done that. The caliphate, defeating them, was very powerful. It was going to take 4 years. It took me 4 months. But it was a very strong dictum that I gave. I said, get them. Defeat them, end it. We were fighting for 20 years against ISIS, and we did it very quickly. I don't want to be prosecuted. In that case, it worked out very well. There will be some things that perhaps don't work out so well, but I don't want to be prosecuted because I decided to do something that is very much for the good of the country and actually for the good of the world. A president shouldn't have that on his mind, and he has to have a free and clear mind when he makes very big decisions. I mean, the whole thing is a rigged deal, and the public understands it. I'm lucky that I'm able to explain it to the public, because if you weren't able to explain it, the public wouldn't know. They'd believe what they see. So I don't want to win this way. Look, I want to win based on my policies are better. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to get interest rates down. You're going to be able to buy homes again. I mean, you can't buy a home today. The interest rates are so high. I want to win on safe borders. I want to stop wars. I want to stop the war in Ukraine with Russia. I want to stop what's happening in Israel. Israel would have never been attacked if I were president. Ukraine would have never, ever been attacked if I was president. You wouldn't have had inflation. Inflation was caused by high energy prices. I had low energy prices. I would have kept them there very easily. And it probably maybe caused the war with Ukraine because Putin became rich all of a sudden. It went up so much, and I watched President Biden talking about Putin. Putin became very rich because at $100 a barrel, he's got so much money to fight a war. At $40 a barrel, he doesn't have the money to fight a war. But he wouldn't have done it anyway because I told him not to. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. I think it's a very big day for America. I think it's a very big day for liberty, and I think it's just a great day for this country. Again, I hope it's unifying like I think, but it's a big step toward unification. I hope that the justices, because they'll be working on some other cases, but one in particular, presidents have to be given total immunity. They have to be allowed to do their job. If they're not allowed to do their job, it's not what the founders wanted, but perhaps even more importantly, it will be terrible for our country. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so that's the narcissistic and dangerous and completely undemocratic Donald Trump that the left just says has got to be stopped. And what did he make this all about? He made it about us, America. And not only does he get through a speech and all the questions without looking like a cognitive mess, but he makes it all about us. Security for us, stopping the weaponization of government and justice for us. And not just you and me, us, Democrat and Republican. He talked about energy, war, home prices, interest rates, really important stuff that you'll probably notice the left doesn't ever want to talk about. All the left wants to talk about is January 6th and insurrection and Russia and Putin, collusion, racism. It is the same tired playbook after almost a decade, all directed at just one guy. And people have had enough, man. The ether's worn off and they've woken up from their get Trump fantasy and they realize that they're in a whole lot worse shape now than they ever were when it started. And he said a couple things that I think really do say it all. He's more popular now than he was before the weaponization. And Biden would probably do a lot better if he came out against it and stopped it. And he's right. I mean, can you imagine what kind of chess move it would be if Joe Biden came out against it and just gave some blanket pardon and gave some bogus speech about wanting to beat him at the ballot box with better ideas and better policy? It would probably get him back to, somewhere around his comfy 37%. He'd probably be beating Kamala in the polls, but, he's right. And another thing Donald Trump said, which is so true, and he said that he's lucky to be able to explain it to the public. Otherwise, the public just wouldn't understand. And he's absolutely right. And that's exactly what we're all doing here together, man. We have got to keep listening. We've got to keep digging through all the noise and all the nonsense and telling as many people as we can what we see and what we know and what we think, right? But anyway, that's just my take, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't already, be a part of our growth. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Most importantly, share the channel. I'll see you in the next one.